This video is based on the knowledge of Dr. Sigmund Freud, the father of psychoanalysis. Love is something both fascinating and deeply complex. We often see love as pure and unconditional, a force that fills us and makes us feel whole. But is love really that simple? What Freud taught us about love goes far beyond the romantic stories we usually hear. He reveals dark and often overlooked aspects of this emotion, aspects that can sometimes cause more pain than pleasure. Have you ever wondered why some people fall for partners who, deep down, are not good for them? Or why it can be so difficult to cope with the fear of loss, possessiveness, and insecurity in relationships? The answers might lie in Freud's ideas, which explore the labyrinths of the human psyche and the impact of our unconscious on our relationships. Today, you're going to discover 5 lessons from Freud about love that no one has told you. Let's dive into the darker side of this emotion and understand how it affects your choices, your relationships, and above all, your emotional health. Stay until the end and get ready to rethink everything you thought you knew about love. Chapter 1. Love and the Ego. Freud, in his study of the human psyche, introduced the concept of the ego, an essential part of our identity. The ego is responsible for balancing our internal desires with external demands. It attempts to control the impulses of the id, the irrational and instinctive part, while meeting the expectations of society, as represented by the superego. In the context of love, the ego can manifest problematically. When we constantly seek another's approval, and when our happiness and self-esteem depend exclusively on our partner's recognition, love ceases to be a healthy, balanced exchange. It becomes an endless quest for validation. This dynamic can be a dangerous trap because by making someone else the sole source of our acceptance, we risk losing our own identity. Freud warns us that love, in many cases, becomes an extension of the search for recognition. This is deeply linked to our childhood, where we sought the acceptance and affection of our parents. However, upon reaching adulthood, this need for external validation doesn't disappear. It transfers into our romantic relationships. The problem is that when we try to fill this inner void, we may create relationships that aren't genuine, but are based on emotional dependency. What Freud teaches us here is that love, when founded exclusively on the desire to be accepted by the other, can transform into an obsession. This happens because, unable to fill the existential void on our own, we tend to place the responsibility for our happiness on our partner. This obsession with approval can generate frustration, insecurity, and over time, distort the meaning of love. Moreover, when the ego overshadows the true emotional connection, the relationship becomes unstable. We begin to act more as a means to capture the other's attention than as genuine companions. This creates a vicious cycle. The more we strive to please, the more we feel that our identity is being suppressed. The feeling of emptiness and dissatisfaction grows as we stray from our true selves, turning the relationship into fertile ground for insecurities and disillusionment. Chapter 2. Idealized Love. Freud, in his studies, addressed the human tendency to idealize others, especially in romantic relationships. According to psychoanalysis, idealization is a defense mechanism that occurs when we project unrealistic qualities onto someone, creating an image of perfection in our partner. At the beginning of a relationship, This idealization may seem positive, as if love were uniquely highlighting the virtues of the other. However, this distorted view of the partner can eventually become an emotional trap. When we place someone on a pedestal, we are in fact ignoring that person's human imperfections and flaws. Freud believed that by idealizing our partner, we transfer onto them the expectations and desires that we cannot express in our own lives. This process of idealization can reflect our own inner deficiencies, and instead of loving the real person, we come to love them according to our own fantasized vision. The main consequence of this is that, inevitably, reality clashes with idealization. No matter how wonderful the partner may be, they cannot live up to the unreal image we have created. This discrepancy between what we expect and what the partner can actually offer leads to disappointment, frustration, and often emotional anguish. This phenomenon is not confined only to the early stages of a relationship. As the relationship progresses, reality becomes harder to ignore. Those little imperfections, once seen as charming or insignificant, begin to be perceived as flaws. Freud believed that when the expectations created by idealization are not met, a sense of disillusionment arises that can jeopardize the relationship. Furthermore, by placing the partner on a pedestal, we expose ourselves to vulnerability. By assuming that the other person is perfect and that their acceptance or validation is all we need, we hand over our emotional power to them. This creates a dependency that can ultimately be harmful to both parties. Genuine love, according to Freud, requires that both partners be seen and accepted as they truly are, with their imperfections, limitations, and potentials. The danger, therefore, is that this idealization often prevents us from seeing our partner clearly and realistically. Instead of building a balanced relationship where both parties can grow and evolve, we risk becoming trapped in a distorted vision of the other, which eventually leads to emotional erosion and the loss of a genuine connection. Chapter 3. The relationship between love and desire. Freud described three essential parts of our mind: the id, the ego, and the superego. The id is the primitive part that seeks immediate satisfaction of desires, while the superego acts as the moral conscience, imposing limits and social rules. The ego, in turn, mediates between these two forces, trying to balance the impulses of the id and the demands of the superego. In the realm of love, the dynamic between the id and the superego is crucial to understanding the internal conflict we often experience. Desire, which is central to love, is mainly governed by the id. It is the burning desire, the sexual drive, the longing for emotional and physical closeness with the partner. However, the superego steps in to impose the limits of morality, ethics, and social values. This conflict between the need for pleasure, id, and the boundaries imposed by society or conscience, superego, can create a significant inner dilemma. Freud believed that in love, we are often confronted with these two opposing drives: the visceral, irrational desire of the id, which seeks immediate gratification, and the more controlled, moderated desire of the superego, which pursues an idealized and morally correct love. This conflict can generate constant emotional tension, as individuals frequently find themselves torn between succumbing to their impulses and adhering to the values they believe are right in the context of a relationship. For example, in a romantic relationship, It is natural for intense sexual and emotional desires to arise. The id may push us toward an incessant pursuit of pleasure and satisfaction. Yet, the superego can instill feelings of guilt or shame for giving in to those desires, especially if they conflict with our moral values or societal expectations regarding appropriate behavior in a relationship. Freud also suggested that many of the frustrations and anxieties we experience in love stem from our inability to reconcile these two aspects: the unconscious desire for pleasure and the need for self-control and censorship. The problem occurs when people cannot integrate these forces within themselves, leading to repression or overindulgence, both of which generate emotional imbalances that affect the relationship. In some cases, the conflict between the id and the superego can be resolved through what Freud called sublimation, the process of transforming primitive desires into something more acceptable or productive for society. In love, this may manifest when passion and desire are channeled into a deeper emotional connection, transcending mere physical pleasure and evolving into a quest for intimacy and mutual understanding. What Freud teaches us here is that love is not merely a passive or idealized emotion. It is a complex and conflicting force where our deepest and most primitive desires clash with social and moral norms. This dynamic can create both suffering and satisfaction, and understanding how to manage this internal conflict is essential for a healthy, balanced relationship. Chapter 4: Emotional Dependency and Projection. Freud's psychoanalysis also helps us understand how we often become emotionally dependent on our partners. Emotional dependency is one of the most common manifestations of how love can transform into an unbalanced and even destructive relationship. Freud believed that our romantic relationships are frequently a reflection of our unresolved needs and deepest insecurities. These insecurities are projected outward, often onto the partner, giving rise to the phenomenon of projection. Projection is a psychological defense mechanism in which we transfer our internal feelings, fears, and desires onto someone else. In a relationship, this means that instead of dealing with our own deficiencies, we project these expectations onto the other person. For example, if someone feels a profound emotional void, they may project the idea that their partner is the only one capable of filling it. This creates emotional dependency, where an individual's well-being depends exclusively on the partner's validation and affection. Freud suggested that this dynamic originates in childhood when emotional needs were not fully met by our parents. As we grow up, these unresolved needs can transform into patterns of dependency in adult relationships. By projecting our need for care, love, and attention onto our partner, we place immense pressure on them, expecting them to be the sole source of our happiness and emotional balance. However, this kind of relationship creates a toxic cycle of dependency, where one person feels overwhelmed by the responsibility of filling the other's emotional void. The dependent individual begins to feel emotionally paralyzed, unable to function fully without constant support from their partner. This leads to an environment where love becomes more of a compulsive need than a genuine, healthy exchange of affection. Freud also warned that emotional dependency can mask the individual's true needs. Often, instead of seeking true love, we are merely trying to fill our own emotional gaps. This occurs when we become so immersed in our insecurities that we forget to ask ourselves what we really need from the other person, and more importantly, what we are willing to offer in return. Additionally, projection can cause us to see qualities in our partner that they do not possess. When we project our own unmet needs or desires onto the other person, we interpret their actions in a distorted way. This can lead to unrealistic expectations and disappointments, as we expect our partner to fulfill a role that may be beyond their capabilities or limitations. The key here is self-awareness and the ability to be emotionally self-reliant. Freud believed that in order to establish healthy love, one must work to resolve internal emotional issues before entering a relationship. Love should not be seen as a way to compensate for deficiencies, but as a genuine mutual connections where both parties can support each other without overwhelming the other. Chapter 5. The Fear of Loss and Insecurity. Freud also addressed one of the greatest fears we face in romantic relationships, the fear of loss. This fear is so powerful that it often shapes our behavior in ways we don't fully understand. When we are deeply involved with someone, the fear of losing that person can cast a constant shadow over the relationship, affecting our attitudes, decisions, and even our self-esteem. This fear is closely linked to emotional insecurity, a central theme in Freud's psychoanalysis. When we feel that our worth and well-being depend on the other's approval or presence, we become vulnerable to anxiety over losing that source of validation. Freud explained that these insecurities often have roots in childhood experiences, such as the loss of a significant attachment or feelings of abandonment. These experiences leave marks on our psyche, and as adults, the fear of loss is frequently projected onto our romantic relationships. The issue is that the fear of loss often leads us to behave possessively, controlling, or even suffocatingly. Instead of cultivating a healthy, balanced love, we may fall into the trap of emotional dependency, where the relationship ceases to be a free choice and is instead seen as a vital necessity. This creates a constant tension, as one fears that any misstep or distance from the partner might result in abandonment. Ironically, in trying to avoid loss, we often create the very emotional distance we dread. Furthermore, the fear of loss can manifest as insecurity about our own self-worth. When we feel that our love may not be reciprocated or that the partner could leave us at any moment, our self-esteem takes a direct hit. We come to believe that if our partner abandons us, our identity will crumble as well. Freud suggested that this is linked to a sense of helplessness originating in childhood, when we depended on our caregivers for emotional survival. This fear of rejection or abandonment reflects a much deeper anxiety related to our own perception of value and dignity. However, psychoanalysis also teaches us that the fear of loss does not have to be destructive. While it is natural to feel some insecurity in a relationship, the process of self-knowledge and emotional growth is essential for overcoming these anxieties. When we learn to deal with our insecurities and develop emotional self-reliance, the fear of loss diminishes. The relationship then becomes a conscious choice rather than a desperate necessity. Freud teaches us that true emotional freedom in love can only be achieved when we accept that, despite all the fear and anxiety that loss might bring, our identity and self-worth do not depend on another's presence. Genuine love should not be seen as an emotional prison. It is a partnership where both individuals can grow, be free, and at the same time support each other in a healthy way. This video has taken us on a profound journey through Freud's psychoanalysis, exploring the dark aspects of love that often go unnoticed, from the role of the ego and the obsession with acceptance, to the idealization of the partner and unrealistic expectations, and finally, to emotional dependency and the fear of loss. We've seen how these factors shape and often distort the way we relate to one another. Freud showed us that behind the search for love, the shadows of our psyche are often hidden. Insecurities, deficiencies, projections, and unresolved desires. Love, then, ceases to be an expression of freedom and genuine connection and becomes an endless quest for something external to complete us, rather than a journey toward self-realization as whole individuals. But what Freud also powerfully teaches us is that self-knowledge is the key to breaking these emotional chains. When we become capable of understanding the roots of our insecurities, facing the shadows of our past, and learning to value ourselves, we can finally experience love that is free, genuine, and reciprocal. True love is not an emotional prison. It emerges from a place of authenticity, where two individuals unite not to fill voids, but to share their lives, vulnerabilities, and strengths. When we understand this, the fear of loss and emotional dependency lose their grip, and love becomes a conscious, healthy, and balanced choice. So, if you wish to experience a freer and more balanced love, start with self-knowledge. Understand your insecurities, recognize your deficiencies, and learn to fill them on your own. Only then will you be able to fully and genuinely embrace love, transforming it from a burden into a true source of mutual growth and happiness. If this video made you reflect on love and relationships, please give it a like and share it with someone. Comment below if you've noticed these patterns in your own relationship.